And now Daytime on 2 begins with a look at the relationships between living organisms in science topics.
Mouldy, rotting food, unfit for human consumption, but it is being consumed. You're watching 30 days in as many seconds. What was food for us is now food for other living things, such as fungi. What we normally see is only part of a fungus, a small part. Usually, most of the fungus is hidden, underground or inside whatever the fungus is growing on. The unseen part of the fungus is a tangle of microscopically small threads. Fungi grow through their surroundings and eat away at them, consume them. The threads contain a juice which breaks down the surrounding material to use as food. These growing parts of the fungus aren't pushing up to reach the light. Unlike green plants, fungi can't use light to make food. They don't contain chlorophyll, so they can't photosynthesize. In the case of fungi, the parts you can see are only for reproduction. On the underside of the cap are structures which produce countless millions of spores. Each can start a new fungus. The spores are tiny. They're so tiny, they're wafted off on the breeze. Each spore can start a new fungus colony if it lands in the right place, usually somewhere shady, damp, and undisturbed. Some fungi are poisonous, and a few are deadly poisonous. And even if they're not, they can cause problems in other ways. Farmers spend a lot of money spraying their fields to protect their crops from fungi. For instance, there's a fungus called potato blight, which attacks potato plants and their crop. For centuries, the potato was the main food for the poor people of Ireland. But in the 1840s, the crop repeatedly failed, ravaged by potato blight. People died in their thousands. Starving and desperate crowds rioted. Others fled to a new life in America. Today, we know more about the fungus and how to keep it in check. Potato blight is no longer such a problem. In one sense, all fungi are the same. They eat away, they consume the things they live on. The relationship between a fungus and the substance it lives on is distinctly one-sided, in favor of the fungus. But relationships, links between one living thing and another, aren't always so one-sided. The growth on the crab's back is a very simple animal, an anemone. The anemone isn't on the crab's shell by accident. The crab has put it there. The stinging tentacles of the anemone protect the crab from predators. For the crab, it's a big advantage to carry around an anemone on its back. And there are advantages for the anemone as well. Crabs are messy eaters. Scraps of food drift away. Food for the anemone. The anemone has a readily available food supply. The crab and the anemone are in partnership. In the oceans, such partnerships are not unusual. Big fish, like rays, are troubled by tiny pests living on them. The small fish swimming with the ray eat the pests and so keep the ray clean. In return, they get protection by staying close to the much larger fish. Similar relationships occur on land. These birds keep down the flies and other insects which plague the buffalo. In return, they too get protection from being close to a large animal. It's interesting that so many of these partnerships include food and protection. But partnerships aren't confined to pairs of animals. For a long time, it was known that some plants had lumps on their roots. These plants grew well, but nobody knew why. Studies of plants, such as peas, have shown that the lumps, called nodules, are the result of a very useful relationship. The nodules contain microbes called bacteria. The bacteria get in the first place, through a root hair, invade a cell, and multiply. It's a good place for bacteria to live because there's a constant supply of food. The bacteria use the nitrogen gas from the air to produce nitrogen compounds. The nodules are full of bacteria and nitrogen compounds. In turn, the plant can use those nitrogen compounds to make food substances, so it grows much better. Scientists are trying an experiment with seeds to find out how they can help this natural partnership by adding the correct bacteria to the seeds before planting. There's still a lot of research to do to ensure there are no drawbacks, but it seems that the technique can produce a marked improvement in plant growth. Some relationships, however, are far from useful. Typhus is a deadly disease carried by body lice. Body lice live on people. In 1943, 2,000 people died in Naples in an outbreak of typhus. The body louse was eventually controlled using an insecticide called DDT. It's now been almost wiped out in Europe. But other types of lice are by no means extinct. The head louse spends its life clinging to hair, where it lays its eggs. The eggs and the adult lice get warmth, protection, and food. Although head lice can't carry typhus, it's a very unequal relationship. Head lice are parasites. In return, we get nothing, except an itch, or worse, an allergy. Despite modern hygiene, head lice are on the increase, mainly because people are too embarrassed to do anything about them. And that's a pity, as treatment is easy and effective. We know all about head lice and how to treat them. The life cycle of a head louse is simple, so they're easy to control. Unfortunately, there are other parasites which are more difficult to control. One of the biggest medical battles in the world today is against the parasite that causes malaria. This is the Gambia, a tiny country on the west coast of Africa.
This child's got a high fever. It's not particularly anemic, but it's probably got malaria.
In Africa, 1 child in 2 dies before the age of 5, and malaria is nearly always involved. At least 1 child in 10 dies as a direct result of malaria, and there's not a lot the doctors can do. There are too many patients and too few medical staff. By African standards, these people are lucky. They live within walking distance of a modern hospital. But that is not always enough. children who've had malaria for a long time are too weak to fight it off. Many of them are too ill to be saved. It's been known for over 100 years that malaria is passed from person to person through the bite of a mosquito. There are 600 types of mosquito, but only 4 of them are involved in malaria. Unfortunately, in the vast tropical regions of the world, the malarial mosquito breeds on a gigantic scale, and for a long time there were no effective methods of control. Then, in the 1930s, effective insecticides came onto the market. It was known that after feeding, mosquitoes often rest in dark, quiet places, like the walls of houses. It was hoped that spraying them with DDT was the answer. But some houses or walls were missed, and in addition, some mosquitoes became resistant to the DDT. What was needed was a detailed study of the malarial parasite itself. When an infected mosquito bites, it passes some of the parasite to the person's bloodstream. And that's when things begin to get really complicated. The parasite travels to the liver. One parasite attacks one liver cell. Inside the liver cell, it multiplies 1,000-fold. Three days later, the parasites escape back into the bloodstream. Each parasite attacks a red blood cell. They're the large roundish shapes. The parasites feed on the red blood cells before escaping back into the bloodstream. Other mosquitoes then bite the infected person. As they suck up the blood, their food, they will also suck up the parasites. Inside the mosquito, the life cycle of the parasite is equally complex. At this stage, some of the parasites are present as males and females. The males change dramatically. They produce long, wavy sperm, which eventually split off and move away towards the female microbes. Where fertilization takes place. The new fertilized parasite makes its way to the outside of the mosquito's stomach. It's no wonder it took scientists so long to work out what was happening, as this is one of the most complicated parasitic life cycles known. On the outside of the stomach wall, the final changes occur. The parasite multiplies 10,000-fold before being released. Released into the mosquito's saliva to start the whole process again. Armed with this knowledge, the scientists can begin to search for effective treatments. If they want to fight the parasite in people, they have to keep track of it by taking regular blood samples. That's the only reliable way for the doctors to find out who has malaria, who needs treatment. The problem is that blood testing takes trained people and good organization. These may be lacking in some countries. It would be better if there was a more permanent solution, such as a vaccine. However, research like that could take another 10 years or more because the parasite's life cycle is so complex. And in the meantime, scientists are looking for other ways to control malaria. Another answer to the problem is to change the line of attack. Instead of going for the parasite, it might be possible to concentrate on the mosquito that carries it. The more scientists discovered about the mosquito's life cycle and breeding habits, the more ideas they had about ways to control them, and hence malaria. For instance, they know that the female mosquito lays her eggs in or near water. So this has to be a good place to attack. One way is to clear up all the sources of water. Filling a water pit with rubbish may not look very pleasant, but a rubbish tip is better than a mosquito-infested swamp, particularly when it's finally covered with a layer of soil. But the world is a very wet place, and filling in all the swamps is not a realistic possibility. Smaller stretches of water need to be checked regularly. If mosquito larvae are present, they're easy to see because they float just below the surface, breathing air through a tube. At this stage, the larvae are particularly vulnerable to spraying. Of course, all this spraying needs trained people and a constant supply of chemicals. In addition, it's important not to miss any water at all. The larvae might develop in drains or even in something as small as a tank or a bucket. Careful spraying is essential. Even if just a few mosquitoes are missed, they could soon breed again. Spraying has to be done well. In some parts of the world, greater success has been achieved by coupling spraying with other methods. There are some fish which feed on mosquito larvae, so release them into the water and they'll get on with the job of controlling the larvae. If all the sources of water were treated by one or more methods, then the mosquitoes could be eliminated from the area for a few years. For a short time, the cycle could be interrupted. The aim of mosquito control is to give scientists a chance to concentrate on treating all the infected people with anti-malaria drugs. Malaria would then be wiped out. If malaria can be wiped out in the short term, then there's hope for the long term. If there were no infected people, then it wouldn't matter about the mosquitoes anymore, because if they bit people, there'd be no malaria parasite present to pass on. But despite knowing all about the parasite's life cycle, and no matter what control methods are used, the elimination of malaria is still a long way off. It needs money, effort, and a will to succeed on a worldwide scale.